Are excited to have our next speaker, Francine Montemurro, and she will be discussing dealing with difficult situations and people.
So good morning, everyone. Where's my advancer? Just here. I'm Francine Montemurro. I'm the University Ombuds at Boston University. Welcome to Boston. The snow is gone just for you. I'm going to try to zip through my slides in light of the time. I don't know how many of you know what an ombuds is, but basically an ombuds is somebody who deals with conflict, tries to help people and the institution deal with conflict in the most effective way that we can. So I'm not a scientist. I can tell you that when you move into your role as a supervisory scientist, when you start opening your lab, even when your science is going well, your problems may come from your human resource pool, that is who you've hired. Even when you've hired well, there's conflict that happens. And so what I want to do is just sort of give you some tips, 5 takeaways that might propel you towards looking to some resources and thinking about things before you actually start supervising. So a few perspectives on conflict, managing conflict and having difficult conversations, and a few good resources. I'm going to try to zip through these slides so that we can get to the question. So conflict, you know, just yell out when you see that word, a word association, very quickly, without thinking too fast. What words do you think of? You can yell, I can hear you. Argument. Fights. Anxiety, anger. We could go on in that vein. When I used to teach mediation courses, we would do this and we would always come up with the same kind of list. The list that talks about things that are unpleasant, uncomfortable. That's our normal, natural reaction to conflict. There's negative consequences that we associate with conflict, and so we try to avoid it. There's nothing unusual about that. So one perspective is that conflict is a social disease that needs a cure. Another perspective that I'd like you to consider, whoops, you go back, is that conflict is a normal, foreseeable aspect of human interaction. And managed effectively, it actually can help us move ahead. So if you think about it, there are opportunities in conflict. There are opportunities that help us move ahead. It may be, if you've ever had a falling out with a friend or a family member, if you manage it well, if you have a good discussion, on the other side of that conversation, you often end up with a stronger relationship. Similar in a workplace situation. One of the things that conflict does when there is something uncomfortable that happens, a disagreement, a fight even, hopefully not a physical fight, but a disagreement, is you uncover some of the problems that you didn't know were there. You uncover the fact that maybe there's an unaligned way of dealing with lab safety or lab protocol. People are arguing about it because they're saying, my way's right, no, my way's right, no, my way's right. Well, they're not doing it. Obviously, they're not both doing it the right way. They're not both doing it one way according to whatever protocol is established. So there are opportunities if it is managed well. So the first takeaway is for you to think about, as a supervisor, that effective management of conflict really calls for being willing to be engaged in it, not suppressing it, not avoiding it, even though our first instinct is probably to run from it. Okay. Takeaway 2, managing conflict starts with preventive medicine, collaborative processes, and clear expectations. So my colleague just before me talked about that a little bit, about setting expectations within your lab, about being clear about what it is that you want to happen, communicating clearly. There are, let's see, a couple of preventive medicine examples that I can throw at you. And they're adapted from the NIH Collaboration and Team Science guide, a field guide, which, by the way, I have the URL on my slides. It's also on my website. It's free, and it's very good. Some of the things that will help you avoid getting into a bad conflict situation is by clearly communicating what it is that you want to do. What is your shared vision in the lab so that there aren't unaligned expectations? Help your team create a shared vision. Model a collaborative process where all views are shared, even dissenting ones. If people feel that they can't share their view, they're not sharing something that may be important. Maybe there's a lab safety issue. Maybe the science is really tanking, but somebody's afraid to say it because they're afraid they're going to get silenced by their colleagues or by the PI. These are the kinds of things that particular guide will talk about in how you can do this, to set up really an environment in which you'll have good conflict instead of unmanaged bad conflict. One of the things I want to point you to, is it on my next? Okay, so conflict happens with thorough preparation. I want to talk about one preparatory document that you can get online as well. It's called Welcome to My Lab. It's a letter that was developed by my colleagues at NIH in the Ombuds office, and it really sets out things very clearly about what is expected when you get to a lab. Things like how you're going to communicate, how professional development is reviewed, even things as specifically as what the PI expects in terms of the lab notebook. Let me just give you an example. This is an excerpt from it, and everyone can just go to the website and steal the letter and make your own template out of it. But it reads, notebook. This is the letter from the PI to anybody who's starting the lab. Devote a lot of time and attention to maintaining your laboratory notebook. Your notebook will remain at NIH even after you leave. They will be part of the official record of our work, and I expect the following. Then it talks about what should go into that notebook. So you see how specific that person is being. That's the kind of preventive medicine that you can go into right when you start your lab. Okay, now I've lost my place. With thoughtful preparation. Okay, conflict 3. Takeaway 3 is conflict happens even with thorough preparation. So say you got the letter to my lab all out and you had open conversation and you thought everybody's interests were aligned. Well, conflict could happen anyway, even if you hire the right people. Expect it to happen, especially when you have a diversity of people in your lab, not only from different countries or different backgrounds, but from different scientific disciplines. Different scientific disciplines have different ways of thinking about things. And so you can expect there to be conflict, breakdowns in communications there as well. It doesn't mean you should run from it or do what, in my experience as ombuds for many, many years, people tend to do. They avoid it. They just cover their ears and say, no, I don't know how to deal with this. So with thoughtful preparation, difficult conversations can yield constructive outcomes, because most attempts at managing conflict start with a difficult conversation. It does not start with sending an email to everybody, a blast email that says, would everybody please get along, or something that covers everything. It starts with a conversation. And if you shoot from the hip, you'll probably end up calling my office the next morning and saying, oh dear, I think I blew it. Okay, preparing for a difficult conversation. The first thing that I advise people to do is work on yourself. Nobody likes having a difficult conversation. Nobody likes sitting somebody down and saying, gee, this paper that you gave me in the first draft is not looking so good. Nobody likes to do that. So the first thing you have to do is center yourself. And as my wonderful colleague up in New Hampshire says, the majority of work in any conflict conversation is the work you do on yourself. So often people come to my office and they want, well, how can we make my PI, not be such a jerk? Or how can we make my lab mate understand that I'm the one, who's got the better process here? It's not about trying to change other people. It starts with you, and it starts with your developing relationships and working on your communication and working on listening and that sort of thing. I'll get to that in a second. But no matter how well the conversation begins, you need to stay in charge of yourself, your purpose, and your emotional energy. People do a lot of things to get centered. Pray, meditate, just take a deep breath. But there are some things that will keep you focused, and that will be working on a plan. So the first thing is to work on you. The second thing is to work on a plan before you go in and have that conversation about what's not going right, okay? The first thing is to speak directly to the other person. How many have ever worked in a place where everybody is talking about somebody else, including maybe the boss? Gee, I can't stand the way Francine is always 20 minutes late to everything. But does anyone talk to Francine and say, Francine, could you please get here on time because the meeting starts at 9 o'clock, not 9:20? So our first instinct, again, is to avoid the conflict because it's uncomfortable, because it feels like a fight. Speak directly to the other person. Know your purpose and your message. When I help people put together their plan for a difficult conversation, the first thing I ask them is, what is the outcome? What would a successful conversation look like? And sometimes people can't answer that question because they're so caught up sometimes in the emotion. They want to tell the person they think they're a jerk or whatever it is that they want to tell them. So know your purpose. Decide how to frame the problem. If you frame the problem as you see it in accusatory, blaming language, I can tell you your conversation is not going to go where you hope it will go. If you start your conversation with like, Francine is always so irresponsible because she's always 20 minutes late and we want to know why you can't be here on time, it's going to tank. On the other hand, if you frame it in a way that talks about your need, we need to have everybody here at 9 o'clock to start on time, otherwise we'll run over. So you have to think about how you're opening the conversation, how you're going to frame the problem. Identify and get rid of assumptions. This is something we all do. When somebody does something that we find upsetting or concerning, we figure it's because they're selfish or they're a jerk. If somebody cuts you off in traffic, it's the same thing. Ah, they're a jerk. Well, I don't know, maybe they're late to the hospital. Who knows? So the first thing we have to do is get rid of those assumptions and stay open, which is a tough thing to do sometimes, to the idea that maybe there's something going on that you need to listen to. And that means making a commitment to really listen. I'll talk about some skills at listening and examining your own contributions. You know, even the flattest pancake has two sides. There's always two sides to a story. And sometimes we have been a contributor to the conflict that we're trying to deal with. So rule one, work on yourself. Second, work on a plan. Preparing a difficult conversation. That's how you begin to resolve conflict. Takeaway 4, don't go it alone. Know when to ask for help, be willing to ask for help, and know where to ask for help. In my organization, when somebody has to have a tough conversation with somebody because their staff member isn't working out or because they're having a conflict with their PI or whatever, they need to know when to ask. And in my office, in the ombuds office, we always tell people it's never too early. It's never too early. If you're sensing a tension, don't wait till it blows up. Don't avoid it. Nobody's going to laugh at you for coming in early to talk about how to handle a potential problem. Be willing to ask for help. So often people think, oh gosh, this is so silly. You know, the person, I just have to tell the person to shape up. And you know, people are kind of shy about asking offices to help them, asking for help. So don't be shy about it. You can't imagine the amount of damage that is wreaked by these kinds of human conflicts. Don't be shy about asking for help. Nobody in the ombuds office is going to laugh at you anyway, if you were at BU. Know where to ask for help. So when you get to your organization, at Boston University, the resources there would be, for example, human resources, the ombuds office, which is a confidential resource. It might be your department chair, it might be your mentor, but know where those resources are. Some organizations do a great orientation when you first start working someplace, others not so much, so it's really up to you to hunt them down. But don't go it alone, because if you're in a conflict and it escalates because you have not handled it well, then it's kind of on you. And this is America, so people like to go to their lawyers, and we're a litigious society, and you don't want it to escalate to a formal grievance or to litigation. Okay. Takeaway 5, learn how to engage some basic conflict management skills. So good conflict management is a combination of will and skill. It's a little bit of your willingness to engage on something that's uncomfortable because it's conflict, and it's also a little bit of skill. But how many of you in this room have a PhD? Okay. Okay, if you could get a PhD in this area, in this scientific area, you can learn these skills. We teach them to children everywhere. They're very simple skills, okay? And I'll give you a few resources where you can read them or go to workshops. They're everywhere. Wherever you are, you can find a workshop or a book. Okay, active listening. The first skill is to understand. And believe me, and I used to teach mediation to graduate students at SUNY Binghamton. This is one of the hardest parts of the course, was getting people to actually listen at the table. You know, I came to college to learn how to listen. It's a big skill. It's something that doesn't come to us naturally. Communication and conflict styles. How do you express yourself? How do other people hear what you're saying? Might you have to reflect on whether what you're saying is coming off like an accusation? So that's a part of a skill. Fundamental negotiation concepts, I have a few resources I can point you to on that. That is things like understanding a position as opposed to what an interest is. Basic negotiation. One of the things that a good book like Getting to Yes covers is naming the problem as the problem versus the people as the problem. Our instinct is sometimes to say, oh, we have a problem in the lab and it's because Francine did blah, 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 or Francine is a difficult person, or Francine is too sensitive. So often in my work, it's not because of a person. A person may not be all that, people are generally complicated, but what your job will be as a supervisor is to help to see the problem as the problem, not the person as the problem. It's a default mechanism that is often an excuse. And then what happens is that person leaves, and lo and behold, the problem recurs in some other problem person. Knowing how to create win-win situations, delivering feedback effectively, both the good and the bad. So as a supervisor, it is your job, whether you have to do an annual performance evaluation or not, to let your staff know, let the people in your lab know what's going well and what's not going well. And if you need some help on that, there are many books that have been written on giving feedback. But it's one of those things that people avoid doing. So what I end up seeing in my role as ombuds is a postdoc who's saying, I thought everything was going well. Nobody said anything. Nobody said there was a problem. And now this person is trying to get rid of me without, you know, because you know, he says the funding is run out, but it actually hasn't run out. What's really going on here? And often, there are problems that can be remediated if you can call it to somebody's attention. Okay. A few good resources. I'm going to zip through these two so we can get to questions. I know I'm zipping through these slides very fast. If you really want to learn how to deal with conflict, your local dispute resolution center, they often have classes, there are several of them in Boston in mediation. Workshops and webinar offerings are all over the place. Difficult conversations, conflict management, negotiation. Within your organization, I and many of my colleagues do offer workshops on having difficult conversations, workshops on negotiation all the time. These are like 3-hour workshops so that supervisors actually leave with some skill. Here are some really good books. Difficult Conversation is a classic. Getting to Yes is a classic. The Collaboration and Team Science, a Field Guide, is again helping PIs prepare for the human side of the enterprise, not the mice colonies, not the test tubes, but the human side of it. And it's free and you can download it. The third side is another text. The Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument is, and it's sort of like Myers-Briggs, but it helps one understand what one's own conflict style is. You can download it on the internet for like $10 or something. Those are some references. Okay, how am I doing on time? Oh, okay, it's a little after 12. So you can also go to my website where I have many references that you're welcome to look at. And so again, there are just a few takeaways to help you think about what you need to do to either manage conflict well when it arises, or prepare your staff so that you have a lab that has kind of good conflict instead of destructive conflict. That's it.